Hello, BookTube. I went to the Brattle Bookshop this morning. First thing, I had errands to run, and it was on my route, relatively speaking. Considering how much I love going there, I don't have to be that close to it for it to be on my route. And for those of you who are new to the channel, I noticed that there are people who are new to the channel, 14,400 subscribers. I noticed the zeros. The Brattle Bookshop is a used bookstore in downtown Boston. They're fantastic. I've been going there for well over a year now. They have 3 stories just jam-packed with books, and also an outdoor sale lot. There's a lot outside with thousands and thousands more books that are organized by price alone. $1, $3, and $5. In fact, this morning, a newcomer to the shop, probably visiting Boston because of the marathon, actually asked, is there any organization out here at all? I said, no, there isn't. I had to stop myself from saying, what are you looking for? But because I'm not a bookseller anymore. And I'm not, believe it or not, an employee of the Brattle Bookshop. But I love going there. Absolutely love going there. If the weather is clement, I'll go there even if it's bone-chillingly freezing. And of course, nowadays, I love going there when it's boiling hot. I didn't always. But today, this morning, was crisp, but not cold. So perfect for a nice leisurely browse. Really, that's the key. It's kind of a mistake to try to hurry the sale lot of the Brattle because the books aren't organized in any way. So you have to give it time to look at a lot of them. You can't just glance at a few cards. Who has the strength of will to do that? So I looked. I poured over all the carts, and I got some books. A stack of books that was fairly heavy. But let's just go through them here. And we'll start with this thing, which is a reprint I had never seen before from I.B. Tauris. This is Billy the Kid by Robert Utley. Paul Newman on the cover there from the, what was the name of this? The Left-Handed Gun? Was that the name of the Newman Billy the Kid movie, the Lincoln County War movie? I've only seen it once, so I'm not a big fan of Paul Newman. But Robert Utley was a historian of the American West. And he wrote a whole bunch of books. And this is his biography of Billy the Kid, the famous Billy the Kid, that strips away all of the mythology and gets at everything that can be known about the person himself, the young man himself. Set against the backdrop of the West of the time and also of the Lincoln County War, which took place in the late 1780s, 1770s, the late 1770s. Savage conflict in what is now New Mexico that grew as it went along and was filled with barbarity, genuine barbarity, all of which is really, really well known. Actually, Utley wrote the great book on the Lincoln County War. I don't know if somebody else has written a later one, but his is really good, and also quality that it shares with this book is that he's also a beautiful prose stylist. It's not just that he's done all the research and talked with everybody and brought together all this information. It's also that he's got a wonderful, elegant, quintessentially American prose line. I think those of you, I was going to say, think a less brainy Bernard DeVoto, but how many people even know what I'm talking about? Maybe not, and maybe nobody knows Robert Utley. I strongly recommend him. If you see a book of his, any book of his, at a used book sale or yard sale or something, grab it, because it's not a question of the up-to-date nature of the research, right? It's a question of how good a reading experience it is. Is it a good reading experience? If it's a good reading experience, then you can read later updates on somebody on your own time. But I remember this book being, there's not much to tell about Billy. There's not much to tell about Billy the Kid in the broader scale, because he was shot to death by Pat Garrett when he was 21 years old. So that's not, in 1881, he was shot to death. One bullet, blew his whole chest apart. But he did take part in the Lincoln County War, and we can piece together other things that he did. Certainly he seems to have been an odd, loudmouthy, remarkable young man. So he's definitely worth a book. And I think I had this, I believe this came out from a university press when it first came out. I think this came out in the late 80s or early 90s. And I think it came out from a university press. It didn't certainly have this cover. Certainly, I've never seen it in paperback. I think it had sort of just an artist's illustration of Billy the Kid on the cover. If I'm remembering it correctly, then it came from a university press that was so small that when we got a copy at my bookstore, It came wrapped in plastic. And I felt so bad. I felt like writing to the PR person at that at at that press and saying, you might as well tear this off ahead of time. I'm going to tear it off. I'm not going to sell a customer a book that's wrapped in plastic. Of course, they're going to be able to look through it. But I might be wrong. That may be a different book. But I love this, and it's long since time that I reread it. So that was a paperback. Then we have another paperback. This is the new edition of the Oxford World Classics version of Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope. With that stately cover, do you remember we had all of these covers for the Palliser novels? These very stately covers. This is the Oxford edition of the novel that put Trollope on the map. He had written a handful of novels before this, and they'd done all right. They'd done kind of all right, kind of sort of all right. Some of the manuscripts that he sent to his publishers in this time period had been rejected, just flatly rejected. Now this is going to have no audience. What on earth is this even? One particularly lamentable book about New Zealand that actually isn't readable, but this too got a lukewarm reaction from Trollope's publisher, who wanted him to cut it significantly, and yet it didn't matter. It was all about the public, and once the public got a hold of this thing, they made Trollope. They made his name. They put him on the map. This was his first hit as a novelist, which was. I don't think it's any coincidence that it came out right around the same time that his mother stopped writing fiction. But why would I get this, you might ask, when I have an e-copy of it and I have a box edition in a slipcase and I have the old Oxford paperback, the mass market paperback? Why would I get this? Is it possible that there is a Trollope treat on the horizon? Well, we'll just have to find out now, won't we? But I love these new Oxfords. I have all the Palliser novels in this form. And just the other day, I looked around for this. I was 100% certain that I had this, and I didn't. And then I found it today at the Brattle. Then we have this thing. Lovely. Modern Library Giant. This was actually the first. Modern Library is a reprint house. They're still going strong. We've seen them recently on this channel. But for a long time, they did these uniformed little hardcover reprints of classics, some of which aren't classics anymore, that they aren't read or considered anymore. But there was always a need. There was always a request from readers. Could you do some bigger books? And the people at Modern Library, one person in particular, bandied around a whole bunch of ideas to do this. They thought that bringing out multiple volumes, a work in multiple volumes, would be anathema to the whole idea of Modern Library, which was very much the idea of Penguin Classics. It was the idea of, let's reprint a really good, accessible version of a classic and have it, at the train station, at the shoe shine stand, at the drugstore. Let's get it into the hands of the public. Let's get it everywhere for a nice, affordable price. Multiple volumes struck a lot of those original Modern Library editors as the wrong way to go, the thing they were fighting against. Now, they eventually ended up doing that with Gibbon. But they came up with a compromise, the Modern Library Giant, which is a much bigger format, more expensive. And I found one of those, a Modern Library Giant of the Complete Essays of Montaigne, in the John Florio translation, which is, the Florio translation is beautiful. It is an absolute monument to the translator's art. You would find, most of you would probably find it unreadable now because it's very much in Elizabethan English, Elizabethan Jacobean English. I love it for that. Absolutely love it. And it was, for a long time, the only version of Montaigne that anybody ever thought to get was the Florio translation. And I had no idea that Modern Library had ever done this. Happy to find it. Absolutely happy to find it. Then, speaking of Trollope, I could not pass this up. I want to read you a bit about this. I don't think I've ever seen this before, and I can't wait to dig in. I probably won't wait. This is by Ellen Moody, and it's called Trollope on the Net. And it's about Anthony Trollope, but as you'll see, those are user names. Those are emails on the cover and on the back. And that's because that's what this is about. Let me read you just a bit here. Anthony Trollope, whose range was greater than any other Victorian novelist and whose depth was equal to the greatest of them, retains the power to surprise us. His work, with its subtle analysis of human motives and feelings, keeps its relevance today. On the eve of the millennium, he is in many ways the most modern of the Victorians. It is therefore apt that he should lead the great Victorian writers into cyberspace. This book is an account by its leader, Ellen Moody, of the group discussion of Trollope's works on Trollope-L, the worldwide internet discussion group devoted to his study. Now, I have no idea if Trollope/L still exists online. It'll be the first thing I do. When I settle down with the computer, it'll be the first thing I do. It'll be to look for that. But this has discussions. Ellen Moody grouped together a lot of those discussions, cleaned them up. That must have been a Herculean task. And has presented them here. There is Tales of Western Ireland. That's a whole chapter. There's a whole chapter on He Knew He Was Right. That apparently sparked a lot of conversation. There's a whole chapter on the Claverlings. There's a whole chapter on Lady Anna. There's a whole chapter on the autobiography. This is going to be a delight. I did not know this book existed. And I absolutely missed Trollope/L. So I've never been exposed to any of the thinking that's going on here. No idea who even posted these ruminations. Was Trollope/L found by Trollope scholars? Or just diehard Trollope readers? No idea. Voyaging into the unknown for Trollope. So 2 Trollope-related things. Then some historical fiction. In just beautiful historical fiction. Somebody must have dumped these. The same person must have sold these at the Brattle. They're beautiful hardcovers with library plastic coverings over them, just in perfect condition. This first one is Lucia St. Clair Robson. This is the Tokaido Road, her big novel about feudal Japan, about basically a chase story that goes right up the Tokaido Road. And I had this as a mass market paperback forever and ever. The mass market paperback had a step back that was quite nice. And I looked right away to see if there was a step back for this thing. There isn't. But that's not the reason we should read a book, right? It's the step back. I'll see if I can find an illustration online. And that'll be good enough. I can just save that to my desktop. It's the book that counts. This is historical fiction, a completely different kind of historical fiction than this author ever wrote. She wrote a whole bunch of historical novels, but never anything set anywhere near this time period other than this book. And I don't know if that's just me or if that was just her, a liberating effect on her, but it's by far my favorite thing by her. So to find it in an absolutely perfect hardcover like that, that's wonderful. That's right up my alley. There needs to be a big BookTube event about historical fiction. It really does need to be. Then another piece of historical fiction, and this is a classic case of Brattle synchronicity, because I just this weekend, during our discussion for the STD Book Club, I mentioned this book and this character, the characters involved here. And I remember once I mentioned it, I thought, I have an ebook of that, but I wouldn't mind having that as a print and paper novel. I really wouldn't. I really would like to reread it. And lo and behold, 2 days later, I find it. This is by Stephen Saylor, and this is Catalina's Riddle, which is his novel about Cicero and Catiline, the Catiline conspiracy. Taking his main character, Gordianus the Finer, deep, deep inside what was actually going on in the Catiline conspiracy. Gordianus is one of his adopted sons, is actually a spy for Cicero in the camp of Catiline. And Cicero asks Gordianus, makes a request of him in this book, specifically about Catiline. And it brings Gordianus straight into the action where he had been hoping at the beginning of this book, he had been hoping to be out of it. He'd been hoping, in a very Horatian way, he'd been hoping to leave the holly belly of the city behind and just retire to the country and stop worrying about all this stuff. Stop worrying about cutthroats in the garden or backroom deals among the hoi polloi or whatnot. He'd been hoping to be done with all of that. And in this book, he realizes that simply isn't going to happen. He has a little exchange with the son, who is the spy in the camp of Catiline. He says, the son's name is Echo. "Oh, Echo, you say these conspirators are deluded, but not half so deluded as I've been, imagining I could escape from Rome. No one can. Ask any slave who's fled all the way to the Pillars of Hercules or the Parthian border, only to be trapped and carted back to his master in a cage. We're all slaves of Rome, no matter how we're born, no matter what the law says. Only one thing makes men free, the truth. I've tried to turn my back on the truth, thinking that by ignorance I could escape the fates. I should have known better. A man can't turn his back on his own nature. I've lived my life searching for justice, knowing how rare it is and how hard it is to find. Still, if we can't find justice, sometimes we can at least find the truth and be satisfied with that. Now I've given up on justice altogether, and I even seem to have lost my appetite, not to mention my instinct, for finding the truth, until I despair of ever finding it again. But to give up on that search is to be utterly lost. That is absolutely terrific. This and one other novel in this series. The series was called the Roma Sub Rosa series. Actually, there's a moment where Gordianus' son mentions that Catiline very much wants his meetings about his conspiracy to be secret, so much so, sub rosa, that he actually hangs a rose from the ceiling of the room, so everyone's remembered that this is completely secret. And when Eiko says that it's all very sub rosa, he smiles. And in the scene, he's having an argument with his father, so there's no reason for him to smile. The reason he's smiling is because the author is smiling at the reader, who knows that this is called the Roma Sub Rosa series. And I love this series anyway. It has very few missteps. It starts with Roman blood, and it just moves on from there. I think that this and Murder on the Appian Way are the two strongest books in the series, which I think is over. I don't think there are any more Gordianus books. And I always loved it when these things were coming out. This must have come out in the 90s, yes? 1993. I used to love it when these books were coming out one after another. I was a huge fan. I was won over immediately by Roman blood and just stayed a fan of the series all along. But you can watch the author getting older. He doesn't do the usual egocentric thing for authors of not updating his author photo. He updated his author photo throughout the whole course of the Roma Sub Rosa series. So when it starts off, he's a very good-looking young man. And then he just gets older and older as his author photos, as happens to all of us, except me, of course. But I was overjoyed to find this, and the timing of it. You know, the weird way that the Brattle gods watch and listen. Then this next one, I got another book in this series just a few mail hauls ago, a few Brattle hauls ago. And I found another one today, perfect condition. This is necrofiction. We've talked about that on this channel before, where an author has set up shop. They've created a property that their publisher is loath to get rid of. And so the author dies, and the books just keep coming out. Robert Parker's Spencer novels just keep coming out. For all I know, there'll be Gordianus the Finder novels when Stephen Saylor has finally gone to his long home. And the same thing is true with Tom Clancy, whose multiple properties, especially Jack Ryan, the character in The Hunt for Red October, those have all just kept going. And other authors have been found to write those books. And some of them have been quite good. Of course, it doesn't take much to write a better thriller than Clancy ever wrote. But some of them have been quite good. And one author that I noticed because of those books was Mark Greaney, who I then followed into his Gray Man series, the books that he writes on his own without any pretense of working on in Clancy's shared universe. The Gray Man series is fantastic, but the Mark Greaney, Jack Ryan novels are also fantastic. And I found another one today, a behemoth of a thing, Commander-in-Chief, which is when Jack Ryan is no longer a lowly CIA analyst. Instead, he's president of the United States. And the bare bones plot of this novel, I don't think I read this when it first came out. I think this came out in 2015. I don't think I read this. I wasn't really reading these. I've only sort of grudgingly come to appreciate them because Mark Cameron and Mark Greaney are really good, and they are the ones writing. They were writing a lot of these things. The Clancy estate, the Clancy literary estate, clearly vets very carefully the people that they get to write these things. That's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And the plot line of this is a little bit 2015. It's a little bit prescient. It's the president of Russia, facing declining oil sales and an encroachment of the Western powers of NATO, decides to launch an aggressive territorial war and just dare the weak will of NATO to oppose him. It's going to be hard. I'm going to read. This is a huge thing. I'm going to read this thing, but it's going to be hard to read it without having Vladimir Putin in mind. I guess maybe it was luck, or maybe Mark Greaney was good at reading the tea leaves. But he's a great fun of a writer to read anyway, whether it's his own creation or somebody else's creation. And Jack Ryan is essentially Here Comes Everybody. So he's not like that much of a creation. You're not threading your way across a complex character minefield in order to write a Jack Ryan novel. So that's the last of the fiction. And then the last thing that I found was a find. It's only going to be a find for me. No one else is going to care about this at all. But I love these things. Absolutely love them. This is a big, fat compendium of the Century Illustrated magazine. This is volume 23. So there would have been a whole shelf of these things. And this takes several issues. Does this actually tell me how many? How many issues? Oh, no, it doesn't. No, it very much does not. No, it breaks down its contents piecemeal throughout the volume. But it takes a multiple... let me see if I can show you something better than this. It takes multiple issues of the Century magazine and puts them together in one big volume. And the reason why this would be commercially viable is because the Century magazine was hugely popular. Hugely. In fact, actually, now that I think about it, the Century magazine started under its own name in 1881, same year that Billy the Kid ended. So that's kind of a weird dovetail. That wasn't intended. But this was a hugely popular magazine that had literary excerpts, essays, serialized fiction, poetry, tons and tons of illustrations, both original pen and ink illustrations and also maps and photographic reproductions. Just the kind of all-purpose great magazine that there used to be a lot of these things. Look at that. Just incredible. There used to be a lot of magazines like this. There aren't anymore. There are hardly any anymore. And they wouldn't be popular anyway. All this stuff is now online. The equivalent, the 21st century equivalent is online. But I love these things. Absolutely love them. There are, in any volume like this, whether it's Century or Speculum or my beloved Atlantic Monthly, there's a huge, they did this all the time, huge row of collected Atlantic Monthlies. And I love them anyway, but one of the things I love about these big volumes is that you will often find in them things that no one has ever collected. These were at least partially driven news magazines. So you got, William Dean Howells would serialize a novel, or you'd get a profile of the king of, Belgium or whatever. But you'd also get political dispatches. You'd get a writer who would go to the White House and talk to the president, or talk to the president's, aide de camp or whatever, and write a series, multiple issues of articles like that are never collected. They're straight from the horse's mouth, and they're never collected. No one ever even knows to look for them in these old magazines. These issues from issue, Omnibus 23 here, are right around the time of the presidency of Garfield, who's getting a big new biography. I guarantee you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the biographer who wrote that new book about Garfield, which may be really, really good, has no idea. I guarantee you that author has no idea to even look in back issues of the Century Illustrated magazine, much less access to those back issues. I love that in here. I glanced through here. There's a long profile of George Eliot. Would have been written, when she was still alive or very soon afterwards. There are long profiles of regional governors and local politicians who may have gone on to bigger things, but they'll be fascinating anyway in their own right. I know, I'm not making it sound fascinating, but I love them. Absolutely love them. They're a bugaboo, these big magazine collections from 120, 130 years ago, because they're heavy and they take up space. So it's a bit of a bugaboo to have them. Like, for instance, the Century magazine took over for Scribner's, but not the Scribner's. There was a runaway popular magazine called Scribner's, which also has bound library-style anthologies like this. A little bit confusing. It's a little bit confusing. It has a Boston connection. The Century has a Boston connection at one point in the person of Frank Crowninshield, but Frank Crowninshield has gone from history. There are no biographies of him. No one knows who he is other than me, so we'll let it go. We'll let it go. It's all very obscure, but I am going to have more fun with this than you would believe. You look at a volume like this, whether it's this or the Spectator or the Old Spectator or Saturday Review, or the Edinburgh Review or the Atlantic Monthly or Harper's Harper's Bazaar, once upon a time. You look at big volumes like this and you think, oh my God, how incredibly dusty and boring. But no, there's so much good in here. And in addition to that, in addition to all the nerdy stuff that I'm going to love about this, I'm going to hunt down the parts in this thing that are about President Garfield. Because there will be things in there that no biographer has even heard because they never saw this. But usually when it's the Century, I mean, the Century was selling something like 300,000 copies every month. That's a lot. That was a lot. It was a lot of prestige. So if you were somebody, I don't know, assistant to some third grade congressman, and you sent a letter to the Garfield White House and said, you know, I'm writing on behalf of Century Magazine, and I would like to come and talk to the president, you'd get a yes. Absolutely you would. Guaranteed. Guaranteed that the president's wife or nieces or nephews took Century Illustrated. The president probably doted over it. Most people in the country did. Most readers in the country did. So that person would, you know, pay $15 to take a train down to Washington, walk over to the White House, walk up the driveway of the White House, no Secret Service checkpoints, no nothing like that, walk up to the porter at the door, who was not armed, and present a card. I have an appointment to talk to the president from Century Magazine. That sort of thing in these things is amazing. Just is amazing to read. So anyway, that's enough of a geek out there. So we have, that's my trip to the Brattle. We have the Century Magazine. I looked. I didn't see any other compendiums here. I grabbed the one that I saw. We have Commander-in-Chief by Mark Greaney. Jack Ryan in the Oval Office. We have Catalina's Riddle, echoing the mention of Catalina's conspiracy from SPQR. We have The Tokaido Road. I would gladly have grabbed this in a mass market paperback, but a beautiful hardcover with a dust jacket on it. That's fine by me. We have Trollop on the Net, a very early turn of the millennium internet group discussing the works of Anthony Trollope, and here they are preserved. How many groups like that are they not preserved? Then we have the Essays of Montaigne in the Florio translation. Did not have that. Now I do. We have the newer paperback, the trade paperback of the Oxford World Classics Barchester Towers. Always nice to have some Trollope. And finally, we have Billy the Kid by Bob Utley, who is a terrific writer. He's terrific company on the page, even if you don't think that you're all that interested in what he's writing about. Once upon a time, there was a whole generation of historians who understood that that was part of their job, that was the most important part of their job. So they made bloody well sure to be good company on the page. Eloquent, involving, gripping, all that sort of stuff. Storytelling, pacing, everything. They made sure to do that. And he does. So there are a lot of candidates here for immediate rereading. I am not going to read all the way through the 1,200 pages of that Century Compendium, but I am going to look for the Garfield pieces. And just hope that I don't get too distracted along the way. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. It was a wonderful, fun trip to the Brattle under gray, inhospitable skies. We had 2 or 3 days of full-blown summer weather, and that went away. It is now gray and chilly and windy. It's going to stay that way for a while. But it was made perfect book browsing weather. So anyway, I'll wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.